Cora, this isn't working anymore. Paxton Aldane, 44-year-old chief executive of Aldane Development Group and husband of 9 years, said it in the middle of their anniversary dinner while the crystal glasses still held wine, and the pianist in the East Room had not yet finished the song Cora had requested. His mother stood 4 feet to his left. Rosalind Aldane, 68-year-old matriarch of the Aldane family and controlling trustee of Briarcliff Manor, held her champagne flute like a scepter and watched the moment with the patience of a woman who had rehearsed it for a long time. Beside her, introduced earlier that evening as a strategic creative director for Aldane Development, stood Delaney Hale, 29, in a dress the color of pale gold that Cora had seen charged to a company entertainment account 2 months before tonight. 40 guests had gone still. Cora Aldane, 37, daughter of the late Warren Croft and wife of 9 years, stood at the far end of the table with a dinner napkin folded in her hands. She did not cry, she did not raise her voice. She looked at her husband the way a person looks at something they already knew was coming and had still hoped would not arrive. Paxton reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded letter. "My attorney will be in contact tomorrow morning." Rosalind touched the sleeve of a nearby staff member. "Please have the blue guest room prepared for Mrs. Aldane's things. She'll need space while the house matters are being settled." She said it the way a person orders coffee, easily, without flinching. Delaney Hale did not look at Cora directly. She looked at the table, at the wine, at the chandelier, everywhere except the woman whose home she was standing in. That more than anything told Cora all she needed to know. Guilt looked away. Certainty didn't need to. Cora set the napkin on the table. She looked at Paxton one time. He looked at the floor. That was the answer. Netta Burwell, 58, senior housekeeper at Briarcliff Manor, and the woman who had worked the estate longer than either Aldane child had lived in it, appeared quietly at Cora's elbow with her coat. Her eyes were red. She did not say a word because words would have broken both of them, and Cora needed to walk out of that room with something intact. Outside, the October air was cold and clean. She put her coat on, sat behind the wheel of her car, and did not move for 4 minutes. Then she drove. What nobody in that room understood, not Paxton, not Rosalind, not the attorney who had drafted the letter, not Delaney Hale measuring her certainty, was that Cora Aldane had never been what they imagined. They saw the quiet wife, the woman who showed up to donor dinners without complaint, who smoothed things over with vendors when Aldane Development's payments ran 30 days late, who sat beside Paxton at investor presentations and said little and noticed everything. They saw the simple pearl earrings, the careful handwriting on thank you notes, the way she stepped back when Rosalind entered a room, and they decided she was decorative. They did not see what was underneath. Warren Croft had built Croft Capital Partners from a single commercial real estate deal in Savannah into a private equity fund, managing close to $400 million in development capital. Before his death, he had restructured the fund's controlling interest through Croft Harbor Trust, a private family trust created before Cora's marriage to Paxton, protected by documents Warren's attorneys had prepared with the kind of precision that came from watching too many wealthy families dissolve over misread paperwork. On the day Cora and Paxton signed their premarital agreement, Warren had included the full disclosure schedule. Croft Harbor Trust was listed on page 3. Paxton had skimmed the first 2 pages, laughed about old money lawyers and their paranoia, and signed. Cora had watched him sign and said nothing. At the time, she had believed his casualness was love, that a man who didn't care what she owned must care about who she was. 9 years later, driving through the dark toward a hotel she had booked under her maiden name, she understood she had misread the silence exactly backward. He hadn't cared what she owned because he assumed it was nothing. People who assume a quiet woman has nothing have a very specific way of being wrong. The divorce papers arrived by courier the following morning. Cora was standing at the hotel window on the 14th floor, watching the city come awake when the knock came. The envelope was thick. The legal stamps across the front were crisp and cold. She read it alone, sitting on the edge of the bed with her shoes still on. The settlement was written in precise, generous-looking language designed to seem fair while removing everything. She was to waive all claims to Aldane Development Group. She was to waive any interest in Briarcliff Manor. She was not to contact estate staff. She was not to request company financial records. She was to accept a transition payment and sign a confidentiality agreement that covered the entirety of their marriage. Then she reached one sentence that stopped her cold. Wife acknowledges that she holds no direct or indirect interest in any private equity fund, venture capital entity, development capital vehicle, or investment institution connected to or engaged in financing, lending, or capital support of husband's business obligations and waives all rights to access, examine, or contest any records related to such obligations. She read it 3 times. Why would they name lender interests unless someone feared the lender? She picked up her phone and called Gail Morrow. Gail Morrow, 51, was a private litigation attorney who had handled 2 of Warren Croft's most sensitive business separations before his death. She was known among Charleston's legal community for speaking very little in rooms where other attorneys spoke very much, and for leaving no clause unturned. Warren had given Cora her number the year before he died, written on a card folded inside the back cover of a leather notebook. He had said only, "If things ever become legal, call her first." Gail arrived at the hotel within the hour. She sat at the small desk, read the settlement in silence, and placed one finger on the paragraph Cora had been staring at since morning. "They wrote this clause," Gail said, "because someone is afraid of something. They wouldn't put it in if they didn't need to," Cora said. "No," Gail agreed, "they wouldn't." She looked up. "Before we go further, full disclosure. Assets, trusts, anything connected to you or your father that could possibly intersect with your husband's business financing." Cora opened her secure tablet. The screen showed Croft Harbor Trust, authorized user, Cora Croft, controlling interest, Croft Capital Partners. Gail went completely still. "Does Paxton know?" she asked. "He knows my father built a fund," Cora said. "He believes the controlling interest was sold to outside investors when my father died." A pause. "It wasn't." She explained what Paxton had never bothered to understand. Croft Capital Partners currently held the bridge loan, the refinancing commitment, and the primary development capital facility that Aldane Development Group depended on to complete its 2 largest active projects. Cora had stayed completely removed from any file involving Aldane Development. She had insisted on that separation herself, not to protect Paxton, but to protect the fund. If the fund ever needed to act against the borrower, the record had to be clean. Gail set down her pen and looked at the tablet one last time. "They ask you to sign away your connection to the entity holding their lifeline." "Yes," Cora said. "Then we don't sign anything." Gail opened her briefcase. "And we start asking questions they expected you to be too afraid to ask." 3 days later, Netta Burwell called from a number Cora didn't recognize. She was outside the manor gate, voice low, words careful. "Miss Croft," she said, correcting herself without being asked. "I found some things in the East Archive." The East Archive at Briarcliff was a narrow room off the ground floor corridor that held estate records going back 40 years. Rosalind had told staff it was being cleared for renovation. Netta had gone in before the clearing crew arrived, and Amos Fell, 62, long-time estate groundskeeper, and the man who had worked beside Netta for 19 years, had photographed every page before anything could disappear. What they found were vendor contracts showing payments to a private residence listed under Delaney Hale's business entity, coded as Executive Hospitality in Aldane Development's accounts. What they found were internal memos from the company's CFO requesting that capital renewal documents be processed before spousal review could be completed. And what they found was a loan renewal package submitted to Croft Capital Partners that included a spousal acknowledgement form, signed in a name that looked like Cora's but had not been written by Cora's hand. Amos had watched Cora cover missed payroll twice from her own accounts. He had watched Rosalind tell dinner guests she had done nothing of note. He sent the photographs because he understood that some debts were not financial. Niles Carew, 47, Chief Risk Officer at Croft Capital Partners, and the person who had managed Cora's careful separation from the Aldane Development file for 3 years, called the morning after the photographs arrived. "Chairwoman Croft," Niles said, "the renewal package submitted by Aldane Development includes a questioned spousal acknowledgement bearing your name. We've also identified potential collateral irregularities and expense misclassifications inside the fund's disbursement records." Cora sat at the hotel desk with her father's fountain pen in her hand. It had been his, a Mont Blanc, with a hairline scratch on the cap from the day he dropped it at a closing. She had taken it from his desk the afternoon of his funeral. She didn't know why she'd packed it when she left Briarcliff with one suitcase. She had only reached for it without thinking. "Who knows besides you?" she asked. "Compliance and outside counsel. We haven't moved further without your authorization." "Then convene the conflict-screened committee," Cora said. "Outside counsel handles the questioned document. I don't vote on anything connected to Aldane. Every decision comes from the record, not from me." After the call ended, she looked at her father's pen and remembered a morning from the year she turned 22. Warren Croft had taken her into the Croft Capital conference room after everyone else had gone home. He had placed a loan file on the table between them and said, "A quiet woman in a room full of loud men is not invisible, Cora. She is watching. And a woman who watches long enough eventually knows where every door leads." He had tapped the signature line at the bottom of the form. "Guard your name. Your name is your consent. The day someone else signs it is the day everything changes." Back then she had thought he was being cautious in the way older men sometimes were. Now she understood he had been preparing her for a specific kind of wound. Dr. Carla Finch, 54, a certified forensic document examiner retained by Gale's firm, studied the questioned spousal acknowledgement for 2 hours before she gave her opinion. "The signature imitates your handwriting closely," she told Cora, "but the pen pressure is wrong. The letter spacing is mechanical, as if the writer studied your name rather than remembered it." Cora leaned forward, the C in Croft. Dr. Finch nodded. "You curl it slightly inward on the bottom stroke. This crosses outward. Same slant, wrong direction." Her father had taught her that curl. He had said, "Make your signature yours alone, not something a copier can replicate." She had practiced it for 3 weeks until it was reflex. Someone had looked at her signature long enough to copy almost everything. They had missed the one thing her father had built into it on purpose. The mediation was held in a rented conference room downtown. Dylan Farr, 55, Paxton's lead divorce attorney, set his files down with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to winning through paperwork. Rosalind came in after him, slow and precise, her pearls arranged like armor, and Delaney Hale came last, uninvited under the technical rules of the proceeding but present anyway, which told Cora everything about whose idea this meeting had really been. Delaney was wearing a brooch Cora recognized, a small gold arrangement of leaves that had been a gift from Warren Croft to his daughter on her 30th birthday. Cora said nothing about it. Gale did not sit down immediately. "Before we begin, I have one question for the record. Why does this settlement include specific language waiving my client's rights in connection to any investment entity tied to Aldane Development's financing?" Dylan Farr's mouth moved before he caught himself. "Standard protective language." "Then it won't concern you," Gale said pleasantly. "If we pursue full financial disclosure during discovery, including all capital facility documentation." Paxton's hands went still on the table. Rosalind said, "This is a family matter, not a business audit." Gale looked at her calmly. "Your son made it a business matter when he put that clause in the settlement." Cora watched Paxton across the table. 9 years ago he had looked at her across a different table. Their first dinner alone, a small restaurant he had been nervous about, and said, "You make everything feel calmer." She had taken that as devotion. She understood now it had been use. She had always been most valuable to him when she was absorbing the turbulence he created. Delaney touched Paxton's arm. He straightened slightly. "Sign today," he said, "and this is over." Cora picked up her father's pen. She placed it on the table beside the settlement. Then she looked at her husband. "Your company submitted a spousal acknowledgement bearing my signature to Croft Capital Partners 7 weeks ago," she said. "I didn't sign it." The room went cold. Dylan Farr said, "That is an extraordinary claim." "It is an accurate one." Gale placed the forensic report on the table. "We have a certified document examiner's opinion. We have the original signature comparison, and we have records confirming my client was in Atlanta on the submission date. Hotel records, a pharmacy receipt." She paused. "We have time." Paxton stared at the forensic report. Rosalind's expression did not break, but something behind her eyes did. Delaney's hand had slipped off Paxton's arm. Cora looked at her husband one last time across that table. At the man who had turned their anniversary into a public ending, who had let his mother hold the house keys while his girlfriend wore a stolen brooch, who had believed that throwing her out with quiet legal language was the same as making her disappear. "I did not come here to negotiate," Cora said. "I came here to tell you what happens next." 2 mornings later, Paxton Aldane walked into the offices of Croft Capital Partners, expecting a borrower hardship meeting. He came with Rosalind beside him and Dylan Farr at his shoulder and a revised collateral schedule his CFO had spent 3 nights constructing. He came believing, as he always had believed, that the people on the other side of the table could be managed. The conference room was on the 14th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, a long table with 12 chairs, binders at every place marked Aldane Development Group, Capital Review, Restricted. Niles Carew stood at the front of the room with outside counsel and independent reviewers. Then the door opened and Cora walked in. The room shifted before she sat down. Niles said, "Good morning, Chairwoman Croft." Paxton turned. The color left his face, the way water leaves a glass. Slowly, then all at once, Rosalind blinked. Dylan Farr went very still. Paxton looked at Cora, then at the room, then at Cora again, as if he was waiting for the image to rearrange itself into something he could manage. Cora sat down. She placed her father's fountain pen on the table and folded her hands. Niles spoke without hesitation. Aldane Development Group is in covenant breach on its primary capital facility. Emergency disbursements requested over the prior 14 months show material inconsistencies in stated purpose. Expense classifications within disbursed funds include items unrelated to project use. The screen behind her changed. A chart appeared. These include private residential improvements, personal travel, luxury retail, and jewelry, multiple invoices bearing initials consistent with a third party not employed by the borrower in any documented capacity. Delaney Hale was not in the room, but her initials were on every line. Rosalind said, "The Aldane name has partnered with this fund for 6 years." Niles looked at her. "The fund's policies don't change based on the partner's history. They change based on the partner's documents." Paxton leaned forward. His voice had gone quiet in the way voices go when the ground beneath them is no longer solid. "Cora," he said only her name, as if her name was a question. She looked at him. "You hid this," he said. "You never told me." "I told you my father built Croft Capital," she said. "You signed the disclosure schedule. You told my father's attorneys it was old money paranoia." She looked at him evenly. "You were more interested in what the fund could give you than in who controlled it." His jaw tightened. "You let me believe." "I let you ask questions," Cora said. "You never asked." Rosalind's voice dropped. "You let this family trust you for 9 years." Cora looked at her. "I gave this family 9 years of work that was never acknowledged. I covered payroll from my personal accounts. I renegotiated supplier terms to keep projects from defaulting. I corrected documents that would have triggered audits years before you ever thought to remove me." She kept her voice level. "And 2 weeks ago, you handed me a suitcase and had my things moved before I'd even left the room." For the first time in 9 years, Rosalind Aldane had nothing to say. The review continued. The forensic report on the questioned spousal acknowledgement was entered into the record. The collateral irregularities were documented. The expense misclassifications were displayed in clean rows on the screen behind Niles. Paxton sat with his hands flat on the table and said very little for the remainder of the meeting. At the end, an authorization form was placed in front of Cora, a formal document allowing the independent committee to proceed with its review and recommendations without her direct involvement in the credit decision. Cora picked up her father's fountain pen. Paxton said, "Don't." She signed. He looked at the pen still in her hand and said, "I'm going to lose everything." Cora looked at him without anger and without satisfaction, only with the tired clarity of someone who has finally put down a very heavy thing. "Paxton," she said, "you were already losing everything. You were just letting me hold it together and calling it your success." The capital facility was frozen within 48 hours. Aldane Development Group missed 2 contractor payments the following week. A secondary lender issued a cross-default notice after learning of the breach at Croft Capital. Vendors stopped delivering materials. 2 active projects stalled. The credit network that Paxton had believed was his own strength turned out to have been borrowed air, and now the breathing had stopped. Paxton called Cora 11 times over 3 days. She did not answer. Gail handled every message. Delaney Hale left Charleston. The brooch was recovered during a property inventory and returned to Cora in a padded envelope. She put it in her father's desk drawer and did not look at it again for a long time. Aldane Development Group filed for Chapter 11 protection 6 weeks after the capital freeze. Briarcliff Manor, partly pledged as supplemental collateral during the company's second refinancing, was placed under a receiver's limited review. Rosalind received the court notice at the front gate. Netta told Cora she stood in the driveway for nearly 20 minutes, looking at the front door as though she didn't recognize it. Cora thanked her. She did not feel triumphant. She felt the way a person feels when they have been right about something they wished they had been wrong about. Before anything else, Cora reviewed the employee impact list from the company's collapse. 63 names. Project managers, site coordinators, 2 accountants who had raised concerns about certain expense classifications and been told to reclassify them anyway. People who had shown up every morning and done their jobs inside a structure that had been rotting underneath them. Through Croft Harbour Trust's philanthropic arm, she arranged a transition fund, severance supplements, job placement services, bridge grants for employees facing gaps in income. She did it without a press release, without a speech, without anyone knowing it came from her. Netta and Amos both received formal settlements with full back wages calculated to the day. Cora wrote Amos's reference letter herself. She returned to Briarcliff once, not to reclaim it, not to stand where the humiliation had happened, and let herself feel what she had not allowed herself to feel in front of 40 people. She returned because the receiver needed her signature releasing certain staff housing protections she had arranged years earlier through a side agreement with the estate trust. The front hall was the same. The chandelier, the marble, the staircase where Rosalind had stood 2 months ago, watching with a patience she had finally spent. Netta met her at the door. "Miss Croft," she said, "not Mrs. Aldane, not a correction or an apology, just the name Cora had been before all of it." At the foot of the staircase, Cora stopped. She looked at the place on the marble floor where she had stood with one suitcase while 40 people waited for her to break. She did not feel grief there. She felt something quieter, the particular relief of a person who has finally stopped pretending that beautiful house is the same as a safe one. She signed the documents, thanked the receiver's assistant, and walked out the front door under her own terms, which was the only way she should have ever left. Months later, Cora sat at the head of the Croft Capital Partners board table after the annual meeting had ended and the others had filed out. The room was quiet. The city below moved without knowing her name. She set her father's pen on the table. The scratch on the cap caught the light. She thought about what Warren Croft had said to her in a room very much like this one, the year she turned 22, that a quiet woman in a room full of loud men was not invisible. She was watching. Cora had watched for 9 years. She had watched Paxton spend and dismiss and diminish. She had watched Rosalind arrange cruelty in elegant language. She had watched a company survive on borrowed time and called it love when she shored it up quietly in the night. She had also watched for the moment when silence became the wrong answer. And when that moment came, she had not shouted. She had only made sure she was in the right room, with the right documents at the right time. She picked up her father's pen, turned off the boardroom light, and walked out without looking back. Because some women are not powerful after betrayal. Some women were powerful all along. The betrayal only made everyone else find out. Subscribe to Broken Oath Tales and comment loyalty if you believe a quiet woman's patience should never be mistaken for a woman who has nothing left to say.